So welcome everybody to the Pinecone Burke 30th anniversary slideshow. Um, so this is photos that I've taken from about 1993 up until this year. So sit back, relax, and see a big, huge area. So on May 13th, we celebrated in person and we had a lovely cake. Sorry, we still got people coming in. And so on that evening, we gathered up the people that had been around since 1995 when it became a park, and a few key people to point out. Sure, can you see my cursor going across the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have Mark Haddock in the front here. He was very instrumental in having this become a park, as well as Linda Askerson in the back row there. Elaine Golds, John Kishore, Mel, trying to think what his last name is. Mel Turner, and Joe Foy were some very key people in having this become a park. So just threw a photo of the 20th anniversary, which was great to have so many people together for that. We also had some of the signs that you can see on the right of the photo that have actually now been put up in places. And then this year we were able to celebrate doing the Woodland Walk and put up a little banner. We couldn't find the Protect Forget Forever sign, but we made up another one and had a group of 14 people that did the Woodland Walk. And that was on the anniversary, which is on June 8th. So just a little information about the park. On June 8th, 1995, as part of the Lowerman Nature Legacy, an announcement was made declaring Pinecone Burke Provincial Park. It's over 38,000 hectares. And just showing the map here, it's bordered by Garibaldi Park to the north, Pitt Lake to the east, the Coquitlam Lake drinking watershed to the west, and then the city of Coquitlam to the south. So this was a planning meeting at Ann Holt's house. We have Susan Muhort, Don Gillespie, Doug Benny, Danny Garrick, and Mark Haddock. They're busy planning a route over Burke and into the Widgeon.
That was actually at our house.
Oh, was it? I'm sorry, I make that mistake again.
No problem.
So it was at Elaine's place. Thank you, Elaine. So we'll start with photos of the Pinecone Lake and Mamquam area. So when I was up there in 2017, this road was washed out at this point, and you could only get just a little bit further. They've gone in more recent years and have been doing some logging, and so the road is now in fabulous shape. At least it was last year. We'll see what the winter did to the road, but there were still logs up there to take out, so I assume they will keep the road open. This is what it looked back like in 2017. Couldn't drive it anymore. And still a little bit too rough to drive on. But on this particular case, we were able to drive in further. So Brian and I, we hiked up and we were heading for Seed Peak and Mount Gillespie. This is a sign on the tree showing that you're crossing into the park boundary. So this is showing Pinecone Peak on the right. That's a peak I haven't been up on. Jeff has, but I hope to get up there fairly soon. Pinecone Lake, one of the reasons it's named Pinecone Burke Provincial Park. This is taken from the top of Seed Peak. And looking across the lake on the far side, you can see Little Pinecone Lake. So on a trip, Dawn and I, we hiked down through Knothole Lake, down across this area here, and up right into Pinecone Lake, and then eventually ended our trip at the end of here, and I'll have some photos from there. So that's looking from the pass from Knothole Lake down to Pinecone Lake, and again, you can see Little Knothole Lake on the left. And that's a picture of Little Pinecone Lake. Went for a dip in that one. And some lovely flowers, monkey flowers there. And this is the end of Pinecone Lake. So this is looking to the west. And I believe the peak in the far distance here is Pinecone Peak. It's the highest peak in the park, just a little bit higher than Mount Gillespie. This is Knothole Lake. And I believe this photo was taken in October. It was around 1999 or 2000 when we had massive snow years, and the snow on the lake never actually disappeared that year. So this is looking across what's left of the glacier over towards Mount Gillespie, and you can see the five fingers in the background. And this is the route up to the summit of Gillespie. This photo was taken last year. And then the top of Gillespie, that's Don on top of his mountain with the sign that was put there in 1997. And then Brian and I went up there in 2021 and replaced the sign that had been up there for 24 years with a new one. And you might have noticed that our meeting on May 13th, we had the old sign out. So we're just using it for display purposes now. And in 1997, that was a group that made it up there. It was Don's friends and family. And then last year, it was back up there again. So that was my third time that I've been on top of the mountain. And with Dean and Sean. And from the peak, you can look down and see Knothole Lake. And you can see some of the logging roads in the background that give you access to this area. And then down at Knothole Lake, sorry, November Lake. Now back down at November Lake, looking back up at Gillespie. It's interesting, on the first trip we did in 1997, we actually camped at November Lake and went around the left side of the lake and then up through here somewhere and up to the summit. I still don't really know how we did it because there's two very large avalanche chutes that come down, and somehow we must have missed those. But on the traditional way now, or the usual way to go, is you come across this ridge and come up this way here. So there's another little valley just off to the south of Mount Gillespie called Homer Creek. So when we were up there in 97, we took our second day and went over into Homer Creek. So we nicknamed this one Homer Lake. And after seeing this lake, we walked through this area here and made it over to where we're looking down towards Boise Lake. And Boise Lake flows through this little pass here and down into the Boise Valley. And I just noticed now that I got, you'll see it in a lot of photos, but this is Judge Highway up in the sort of top middle, and then off to the right is probably Robbie Reed. You'll see those those mountains pictured quite a bit. So the Mamquam Pass area, or the sort of the start of the old Fool's Gold route. So this is the whole park, and you can see the sort of the general area that I'm going to show pictures from. Before you get into the park, there's a memorial for a man named Tyler Wright, who went missing in the park, I believe it was in 2014 or around 2012, 2014 sometime, and he was never found. At the time, it was one of the largest searches in BC. And the road that we used to drive back in the 90s, the last 3 kilometers or so is got very overgrown and it's not drivable anymore. The alders have really taken over. There's been a few washouts. First portion of it is in pretty good shape. And then you hit what we call the wall. It was in one of the 103 Hikes books, and this was as far as you could drive at that point. There was a washout just on the other side of this. And in 2017, this is what it looked like. It's quite a bit better now. Still overgrown, but not as bad. And some good sections. And in 1997, we were able to drive and park in this area. This is just below November Lake and right by November Creek. And there used to be a bridge across November Creek, and then they took the bridge out, left just 3 logs to walk across, and those washed out. So now you have to do either a rock hop or a wet foot crossing. And this is where the bridge used to be. And then back in around 95, 96, you could even drive a Volvo to this area. So so I drove here a couple of times, and then they came in and they took out the bridge. So that's the official trailhead of the Fool's Gold Trail with Mount Gillespie in the background. And that's what 3 guys look like in 1994, heading for Coquitlam. So back in that time, that's what I look like on the left. Take note of this rain jacket on the back of my pack here. I'll have a story about that later on. Since then, the wood sign has disappeared. This is what it looks like today on the right side. Same tree, but just a little sign on it. And looking from that spot, looking back at the road that you'd walk. So this is the road that's overgrown and washed out. It's called E100. So as you travel up from the Mamquam Valley to get a high point through Hopeful Meadows, pass by an old sign on the right that's no longer there, showing you to the Boise Trail. Interesting moss on the tree. And then this is my friend Mike Peel. We did a crossover from the Boise to the head of Pitt Lake in 95, I believe it was. So this is where you crest from your climbing and you start getting views looking to the south. That particular trip, Chris Lostrop came with us to take photos that eventually turned up in BC Magazine. So this is looking over at the largest glacier that's close to Vancouver on Mount Mesliwet. And that's Mount Mesliwet there. There's one glacier or a couple of small glaciers that are closer to Vancouver, but that's kind of the biggest one. And then your views over to the south are quite impressive. And as you walk along them a little bit further, you start looking down towards the Mamquam Pass. And if you look in the distance, you start seeing the Five Fingers peaks just starting to show over the ridge.
Hey Ian, I have a quick question.
Yeah,
When you're going through the bush, what kind of tools are you using to like fight through the bush if there's no path?
gloves.
Just gloves?
Yeah, gloves, long sleeves, sometimes rain pants. Yeah, so we don't sort of like in movies where they show like a machete or whatever going through. No, you just push the bush aside and make your way through. So partway up the trail, you can do a side trip that takes you where you can look back over to the north. So this is Don and John Gillespie, not knowing that this was going to be Mount Gillespie at this time, but later on it became Mount Gillespie. And showing Mount Gillespie with Seed Peak. This is Seed Peak over in this area, and Mount Gillespie. And my friend Mike looking down towards the Homer Creek area. And again, if you look in the top left, You start to see the Five Fingers showing up with Mount Baker in the background. A little bit closer of the Five Fingers with Mount Baker, and I believe this is Golden Ears and maybe Robbie Reed sort of joined together. And a little bit better of a photo. Pretty interesting seeing the Five Fingers with that in the background. And then looking up from the pass, looking up to the snowy areas around Mount Mislowitt. And then down at the pass. So you have to go up quite a ways and then down a little bit into the Mamquam Pass, and then you start heading down into the Boise Valley. So this is when I did the full trip with Don and John Gillespie. You'll see on the back of John's pack, he's carrying a sign for Scary Crossing. This was an interesting area that Don was actually putting up orange markers, like nailing them to trees while we were walking. And John and I were walking along and talking, and John turned to look at me just for a matter of seconds. And while he did that, a bear went from one side to the other side, just running as fast as it could. By the time he turned around, the bear was gone. Only bear that we saw on the trip. So the Boise Valley. So the Boise Valley runs more or less from the west to the east and flows into the upper pit. This was taken last year, some incredible fungus that was on the trees. And bracket fungus that was, I don't think it was actually growing from both trees, but was definitely reaching out and touching another tree. Never seen that before. Along the way, all kinds of logs to walk on and climb over or go under. And then Scary Crossing. So interesting, one thing I found out while I was doing this presentation, that I've been looking for this sign the last couple of times I've been through there and haven't been able to find this sign. And the simple reason is I was looking in the wrong area. I didn't remember where the sign was actually put up. So the sign, I know this isn't a very good photo, it's very blurry on the right. But I finally realized that the Scary Crossing sign is actually right near the Scary Crossing Bridge, which you can hardly see in this photo, but it goes across right where the cursor is. And that bridge is long gone. It wasn't much of a bridge. I'll show you what it looks like. But this is the location of what it looks like today. So the old bridge would have been, the logs would have been locked in here and went across here. It's quite a canyon, which you can't see. You'll see it in the next photo. So this is what the Scary Crossing Bridge looked like. It was just some alders that were tied together. Not much. It's quite a bit of a canyon there where it goes across. This is how I went across it the first time. Again, just pointing out, you can see this lovely rain jacket that's just hanging around on the back of my pack there. So again, it'll come up in another story. So there's a waterfall right at the bottom of Scary Crossing. And showing the creek a bit further down. It was actually easier to walk across than it was to crawl across. So I threw these photos in. The one on the left was taken in the mid-90s. The one on the right was taken last year. And I was amazed to see that this boulder is still in the same spot. I'm always amazed that you see some other photos that how large of boulders move around in these creeks. Just absolutely massive boulders. But anyways, for whatever reason, that one is stuck there for 30 years. So this would be just upstream from where Scary Crossing is.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if the bridge is gone, how did
Yes.
you cross the stream last year?
I'm just about to tell you.
Okay, I'll wait.
No problem. It's a good question though. So the last few times I've been through there, we've done what's known as wet foot crossing. So that's a little ways upstream from Scary Crossing. So we just put on some sandals or running shoes. In this case, using a stick to go across. It's not very far. You could almost rock hop it in low water. The difficult part is getting from here back up to the trail because it's quite steep. And so this is a nice little campsite right at Scary Crossing. Camped there a couple of times. It's really good water, nice place to eat. And then just across on the other side of Wetfoot Crossing, some beautiful maidenhair ferns right along the trail. And at one time, this was a trail. It's hard pressed for me to call it a trail now, but it's more of a route. For years, I'd wondered exactly where Fry Pan Camp was. That on one of the maps, it's reversed with what's known as Double Drop Falls. So I was always looking for it further downstream, and in actual fact, it was upstream of Double Drop Falls. So anyways, I'll tell a little story about this sign in a couple of minutes. We put the sign up last year. So this is Double Drop Falls, beautiful pond or pool at the bottom. And one with a little more water coming down. This is John Gillespie with a big bracket fungus. And then we get into the bear gardens or the boulder fields. The little bumps in the background are known as the Boise bumps. A more recent photo. The boulder fields really haven't changed much. The upper sections are all grown in. Lucky enough where we cross, it's mainly just boulders. That's an old photo. A more recent photo. And I was amazed that I'd been through this area at least 3 times and had never come across these drums before. And going through this year, we end up counting about 20 drums that were there. And also there's a sink on the left here too, and a bunch of other stuff that was just left on the ground. As far as I can tell, it's fuel for helicopters. All this stuff was helicoptered in. There was even a big winch. And what I found out when I got home, that in 1983, they were exploring for mining in this location. And I've talked to people that spent a lot of time in the area, and for whatever reason, they never came across these drums and all this material and stuff. So I haven't read this full report yet, but I was quite amazed that in 83, there was multiple helicopter trips gone in there, all kinds of drilling that went on. And this is just above where Cabin Crossing is. So down near Cabin Crossing, back in the probably 92 or 93, they put up this lovely sign showing which way to Coquitlam and which way to Squamish. I think within a couple of years it was gone. They put it in the middle of an avalanche chute, and I'm sure it's somewhere down the Boise Creek or down Pitt Lake somewhere. But the interesting thing of photography, when you take one photo like that and then you take a photo like that, it looks like I'm a giant. So somehow in the mystery of it, I'm a giant. So we camped at Cabin Crossing last year, and when I looked across the way for the sign, we couldn't see it. And when we went over to where it was mounted on a tree, we found that the tree had fallen over and the sign had actually broken in half. It's hard to see in this photo. I should have actually taken a photo when it was in 2 pieces, but right in this area here, it was snapped in half. I was lucky enough to be able to push it together. And actually, okay, I'll be showing some photos. Sorry, I've jumped ahead here. So anyways, at Cabin Crossing, this was an access point to go into the Cabin Crossing and the Cedar Spirit Grove area. So this came off of a logging road. So between these 2 trees, there used to be a beautiful sign that I'll show in a second. So right in this area, this was right on the edge of a clear cut. Beautiful cedars that were protected. This is some of the machinery that was left over from the miners that were in there probably in the 40s or something like that, when they had the cabin. Sorry, I've got some of these photos are out of order. This is back where the drums were seen. Again, I've been through this area 3 times, never come across this, an old lantern, a very big shoe, quite a bit bigger than mine, and a pot and some sort of gas container. Okay, back at Cabin Crossing. This is where we've camped a couple of times. It's a beautiful spot. And this is what I was meaning by some of these boulders that are in here. I've got different photos that I've looked at with these boulders that are around in this area. And over the 20 and 30 years, these boulders are just moved, just gone. I think this boulder here has stayed, and I think that one up there has been in place. So you can see that's that one boulder that's still there, and that's that boulder up there. But all these ones here have all changed. And of course the logs move around too. So that's what Cabin Crossing sign looked like back in the 90s, in perfect shape, freshly put up. And then in 2017, we were showing a little bit of wear. And then, like I showed you, it was had to be put up on the tree in a different direction just because it would have fallen apart otherwise. So it's back in place, which is great. You can see it in the background here. And this is what the old cabin looked like. This was back in the 90s. It shrunk an awful lot in that time, fallen apart. Now, the interesting thing is, I'll go back to this photo here. When the Wilderness Committee was in there, they were taking Doug Benny's signs up to the areas and putting them up, but they stashed a couple of signs in this cabin. And over the time, someone had taken them out of the cabin and left them out. And then I came by and put them underneath a whole bunch of these remaining pieces of the cabin. And anyway, so this is what was left in the cabin for, I guess, 30 years. So we have the Fry Pan Camp sign, which we put up last year. I'd never been going in that direction to take the sign and put it up. So last year we put it up. And the double drop falls sign, which you can hardly read, wasn't in good enough shape. It was really rotten. It would have just fallen apart. So that one got left behind. And then I'd mentioned earlier where there were the 2 trees with the sign. That's the 2 trees where there used to be a nice Boise East trailhead sign. Just on the back side of this was a clear cut. And this photo, you can see that the sign showing the Boise Valley Trail, and on the right you can see some logs. So this is right on the edge of the clear cut. And if it would have continued to be logged, all these trees would have been gone. This is what the clear cut looked like back in the 90s, perfectly drivable road. And that's looking to the Upper Pit Mountains. I believe one of them is called the Remote Peak. And this is what the road looks like now. Overgrown with cedars, hemlocks, alders in some place. This was in 2017. This was a nice section. And Cedar Spirit Grove, which is just across the creek from there. So it's at the confluence of the Bull Valley and the Boise Valley. Very large cedars. Back in the 90s when we were in there putting in a trail, working with the Wilderness Committee. This was our camp area right on the Boise Creek. And just showing a couple photos here back on the left. This was back in the 90s, a nicely built little bridge and the ladder. And this is what it looks like today, showing some wear and falling apart. And that was Don. Hard to imagine that's the pack that he carried for 7 days. And they also built a ladder that's now disappeared as well. You might have seen the poster for the Boise Save It. This is the cedar tree they used. It was actually 2 cedars. Another very large cedar in the area. And the Cedar Spirit Grove sign. Can't find that sign now either. Looked for it. It was plunked on just on the other side of 2 cedars that were probably about 1,000 years old. This is what it looked like in 2017. And this section of the one on the right has fallen off now. So this is the photo from last year. So this section of that tree has fallen down now. So the tree is not in great shape, but the one on the left looks like it's good and healthy. This guy named Tony Briggs that did a lot of work in the area, like trail work for the Wilderness Committee, standing by a large cedar tree. My friend Mike by another cedar. And this is the only large Douglas fir tree that's in the area that we could find. When I was in there last year, I had a bit of a look around for it. I couldn't find it, but other times when I've been there, I've been able to find it. And back in the 90s, with John Gillespie standing beside the same tree. The Bull Valley. Now, I haven't hiked through the Bull Valley. I guess like the last time I went through there was in 96. So I'm looking forward to hopefully maybe this year going through that area. It's not a long valley, but it's certainly got its obstacles. From a distance, this is what the valley looks like. It's got a lovely creek coming through it. But one thing is when you're hiking through really ugly sections, you don't take photos. So it's got a couple of areas that are just massive with alders that you're pulling yourself through. It's very ugly. I think now with satellite photos and GPSs, we'll probably be able to figure out how to go around some of those massive slide areas. But this is one of the avalanche chutes that comes down just before you get into some of the alders. Some great mushrooms along the way. Little pond areas. And then you start gaining elevation to get up to the pass. So this is Don sitting on a rock, looking back down. And then as you get up higher, you start looking back at what's known as the Boise Bumps. Again, one of the Boise Bumps. So that's just on the other side of that mountain there is the Boise Valley. Mm. And up in this area to the side, which I haven't investigated, I believe there's a lake in there called Warner Lake. And then once you're at the pass, so now you're at the pass between the Bull Valley and Debec Valley, looking back at the Boise Bumps. Taking rest, taking the shoes off before you start heading down into the Debec Valley. So I was lucky enough in 1995 to go in by helicopter to this area. We needed to flag the area, the whole Debec Valley, and we got funding through the Wilderness Committee to do that. And so we took in a sign for Debec Pass, and this is John putting up the sign. A little bit of a close-up of it. Again, I haven't been through there since 96, so I'm not even sure if it's still there or not. But the other interesting thing, what happened when I went through in 94 with Don and John, we hiked right through just before this area here. I didn't know it at the time, but that lovely yellow jacket that was hanging off of the back of my pack fell off my pack, and didn't know it until I got into camp that night, and all of a sudden my rain jacket was gone. For the rest of the trip, I had to use a garbage bag as a raincoat. But the funny thing is when we went in 95 and the July long weekend, we had to search around for the trail that we had marked coming up the Bull Valley, and Don found my jacket. And just absolutely amazing. And inside the pocket of the jacket was this map, and it was a little bit sort of moldy up in the top corner and stuff, but otherwise I still have that map today to use. So now we're heading down into the Debec Valley. So the Debec Valley flows into Pitt Lake about 3/4 of the way up. So from there you start getting fantastic views of the Five Fingers. And that's looking down the valley. So the valley pretty much runs north-south, except when it gets to the bottom, it starts heading to the east and into the Pitt Lake. Again, as you get further down the valley, you're still seeing the Five Fingers off to the right, but eventually they'll start to disappear. And then once you come down the steep part of it, the valley flattens out quite a bit. There's an old remnants of a miner's cabin in the area. Didn't look like it was ever finished. Some old steps for it. And once you get into the flatter areas, you start getting into these large meadows. They're about the size of a football field. And generally, when you go in September, it's not too wet. And then you get to Many Faces Falls. So you can stare at this one and you see a face over here, face in here. And I've had other people find other faces in these falls.
Mm-hmm.
And the creek that comes out of Many Faces Falls. And as you get further down, now you can look back and see the Little Finger. It's the lowest of the Five Fingers. And again, more meadows. And this was an interesting photo. You can see Dawn standing here on the left. Blaze marks. We found a lot of areas that there would be a trail for 100 feet or so, and then it would just peter out. But there would be these blaze marks on the trees from obviously the prospector that had been going up there. But the interesting thing is how high the bear scratches were on the tree. Don was probably about 6 foot tall, and reaching up with his hand, he couldn't even touch the bottom of the scratch. And as you get down to the lower part of Debec Creek, the flatness of the valley ends and it goes into a canyon with a bunch of waterfalls. This would have been our last glimpse of the Little Finger up in the top right. And then you start getting into what we call the Debec Cataracts. These series of waterfalls and pools, just amazing. And so on what would have been day probably 5, it was time to go for a swim. So this was great for John and I to go for a dip in these pools at the bottom of these waterfalls. When you're bushwhacking, there's a lot of branches and needles that get into all kinds of places, so it's lovely to wash it out. So getting down to the lower part of Debec, where you've got the creeks coming in. I believe this is probably Disc Creek that's coming in. And that's Disc Falls. And then on our July trip, the creek was extremely high, and we were extremely lucky that this log went 3/4 of the way across the creek. So we were able to sort of shimmy across it. This is if sorry, can't think of his name, but he's actually wearing my rain jacket because I went out and I'd bought a new one because I love the rain jacket so much. Now I've got 2. And so he's wearing the one that I left behind on the trail. And that's Don. He didn't actually walk across it. He got down and he shimmied across as well. And went back 2 years later. A lot less water in September, and that's the same log. I'm hoping that log is still in place so we can use it again. And this is Spindle Creek. So last year made it up to Spindle Creek a couple of times from Pitt Lake. And so this is what Spindle Creek looked like on this day. It was easy to cross. And the old road is not in too bad a shape to this point. And just below the area where you'd head up into the Widgeon Valley, there's a beautiful waterfall. And this is sort of a ridge that heads down to it with some big Douglas fir trees. And so we call this Debec Falls. Now it's kind of interesting. I've been there many times, and for a while, sometimes I'd go there and I would only see part of the waterfall, and then I finally realized that there's actually two ridges that go down towards the creek, and you have to go down the ridge that's actually further away from the falls to get the full effect. And so if you go down the correct one, you get to see the double drop of the falls. It's beautiful. And this is only about an hour up from Pitt Lake. And even better at a wide angle. And we found more waterfalls. The rock has just been carved out over the thousands of years the water has been coming down there. And the other kind of interesting thing, we'd heard about a logging truck that had gone into the creek. And we just stumbled across it. I was up there with Mark Haddock and Jim LeGrand, and Mark said, well, I hear a waterfall. Let's go over to the creek. So we went over, and sure enough, this is where the logging truck had actually gone into the creek. This is only showing part of it, but it's in a beautiful area, and it's been there an awfully long time and not likely to move anytime soon. So I was so happy on this. I guess it was in 2022 when we ventured up Debec Creek. I hadn't been up there in over 20 years. And the old sign for the Debec Valley was still in place. So we added a new hiker sign to it and some directions for going to the Widgeon Valley and to the falls. And then back in the 90s when we were in there doing trail work, someone decided that it would be a good idea to put a bridge across this ravine. Well, those logs have pretty much rotted by now. Now we don't walk across those logs. So went through this area last year with Dean. So we started at the end of September. We started at Pitt Lake and went up the Debec Valley and then up into the Widgeon Valley. So I hadn't done that in a long time. We'd worked at it from two different ends, but we hadn't completed the middle section. Nice big cedar tree along the way. And a waterfall. And then up getting close to the helicopter logged area. We call this Opera House Rock. It's a big area under it that you could take shelter. And this is just before you cross a creek and get into a more open area. When I was there, I guess 2023 with Sean, he found this old hiker sign on the ground right by this tree. So we put it up. So another one of Doug Benny's signs is back up on a tree. And this was the helicoptered area, helicopter logged area that we went through in the 90s. It's hard to find the trail through this area now. I've gone through it different spots each time. This is one of the sections that we still need to go through again and find the best route through this area. And at this point, you can look up Debec Valley where you've come from. So you're looking these mountains in the very far background. I believe those are the Boise Bumps. So those are just on the edge of Boise Creek. And again, same thing. These white marks that you see in the bottom, those are the Debec Cataracts, the little waterfalls. And again, you can see the creek down below here and the Boise Bumps. So I had planned for a possible break, but I think I'll just carry on. So we'll get into the Quebec Alpine and the five
Sorry,
finger.
I have a
Yes,
question on the
yes,
previous picture, if you could go back
yeah,
to that.
I can.
So does the route actually pass through roughly through the valley,
Yes.
or do you go up the mountain at some point?
No, it pretty much, I would say, goes through and then goes through this low pass right here. It look, it doesn't, this is a better photo of it. It's about 10 kilometers in length.
Hmm.
And so usually a couple of days it takes you to go through this valley. Hopefully I'll
Thank
find
you.
out this year. So the Quebec Alpine and Five Fingers is an area obviously up in the Alpine above the Quebec Creek and the borderline between Quebec and the Coquitlam watershed. So you can see the park here. You can see these lines here. It narrows quite a bit through here where Quebec goes. And then there's this bigger section that pops out. And that leads into sort of the upper Indian River area up above Indian Arm. And so I'll show some photos from that area there and quite a few photos of the Alpine above Quebec Creek. So this is
Sorry,
this
Ian.
is yeah.
Sorry, very quick question. If you just go back one slide, sorry.
Yeah.
So is that circle area there, Coquitlam River, is that the watershed?
It is.
Yeah, thank you. Just
So when call it the route, it comes right through here, and you're within a very short distance of the very top end of the Coquitlam River or the Coquitlam watershed.
thank you, appreciate it.
So as I mentioned earlier, we were lucky enough to get a helicopter trip up the Quebec Valley, but I still have not been on the ground in the actual Five Fingers area. So that's a hope for one day to get up into that area. So we got quite a few aerial photographs of the area. And so I'm looking to explore that area at some point. See, the Five Fingers are amazing. This is the little finger. Jeff Rudd has actually been on the top of that one. And there's many trips on the web about people that have climbed some of these peaks and have done trips in the Alpine. That's the little finger again. And that's Constellation Lake with the Five Fingers in the area. So on this little peninsula that sticks out, there was a cabin that was built by a guy named Roy Mason, and he would take his float plane into this lake, and I'll show you a photo of the cabin in a little bit. So this is on the other side of the ridge. This is Mount Bonnycastle on the left here with Barnes Lake. It's kind of hard to see the lake. The lake actually goes all the way around here. This is the reflection. And so this drains into the Indian Arm area, but it's in Pinecone Burke Park. And then Meslillowit Mountain, looking from the south with Joseph Lake, Little Ann Lake, and Ann Lake. Areas that I haven't explored. I was lucky enough that someone sent me some photos from a plane that they took. And then Jeff, I don't know if you want to say anything about this, but or jump in at some time. But this was a trip that Jeff did. So this is Pitt Lake down here. It was intended to be a day trip. So they had hiked up on the logging roads, crossed the creek, and come up this logging road, and then into the old growth. And they were heading up towards Constellation Lakes. So that's Jeff back in, I believe, the mid 80s.
Yeah, September 1984.
1984. There we go. So I'm not sure. I guess you would have walked around this lake, but I'm not sure which lake this is. Or it probably doesn't have.
Yeah, we walked around. So that's looking towards the outlet. So we walked around on the left side of the lake. Yeah, this is really a wonderful thing. You come up the creek flowing into Quebec, and you just pop over the lip of the onto this lake, and it's just spectacular.
Right, and it's an unnamed lake, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think there's something like 32 lakes in that very small area between Quebec, the Five Fingers, and Obelisk.
Right. And I believe this is probably the same lake looking the opposite direction, maybe? Or a different lake?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's the same lake.
Same lake. So this is, at some point, they decided that they were actually going to try and go for the summit of this peak. And it
Well,
wasn't, I don't,
this was supposed to be this was supposed to be a 1-day recce to see if we could get across Disc Creek. But when we got up to here, I figured we better just go for it, and because the chances of being back in there on those conditions were pretty slim, so we just decided to go for it.
so I assume this is your route going up through here and then up this way
Yeah.
up to the peak.
Yeah, just up the gully to the pass, and then up the
Up to
ridge,
this-
and yeah. So the
And that-
ridge was actually just. Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead, you.
Oh yeah, the ridge on the little fingers was just easy scrambling, heather and easy scrambling.
And this is the other 5 fingers over to the left.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I believe this is from the summit.
Yeah, that's my friend Graham having a snooze on the top. So it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon at this point, and we knew we were going to spend the night, so yeah, we just enjoyed it.
And I noticed there's a rock cairn on there, so there must have been some other people that made it there as well.
Yeah, we didn't find a summit register. It was just the cairn.
And then a couple of shots from the summit, looking down towards Pitt Lake, and you've got Judge Holloway and Robbie Reed in the background. And then I believe this photo, and you can maybe correct me, Jeff, but I was looking at this photo, and it looks like these are the Boise bumps. This is looking to the north as far as I could tell. And this looks like the Pollen Peak and Gillespie and maybe Seed Peak in this area.
Yeah, and I think that's Gillespie up there. Yeah.
Yeah, up in this area here.
Yeah.
Okay. So is this Constellation Lake?
Yes, that's Constellation Lake. Yeah.
So this is the cabin. I pointed out that there was a cabin on that peninsula. So this was put in. There's a book called Ice Runway that Roy Mason talks about this lake and building a cabin there. I was expecting, when I'd heard about this, I was expecting something a little more than this cabin. But anyways, Jeff and his friend Graham, they slept in the cabin overnight. And then later on, Jeff actually talked to Roy Mason about the cabin.
It was great.
Sorry, Jeff, you have to say it again.
Yeah, there were 2 bunks. There was a little wood stove, so we got a fire going, and
Yeah, so just
uh,
so just a reminder
wood
that
stove,
the
so we had a fire going, and yeah.
had a good night, and then hiked out in the next morning. So on one of my 7-day trips in the area, we went into Quebec, and we were trying to get to the same area that Jeff was into, but we took a wrong route and end up getting into another area, which was actually pretty spectacular. So this is what's camping like on an old alder choked logging road. So we got up to Disc Lake, which was pretty impressive in itself. I believe what our plan was to go around the left side of Disc Lake and get up into this alpine area. This is Mount Obelisk, and I believe this is the Shark Fin. But what we found out when we got down to the lake, that it was too difficult to try and go around. So what we did instead was we headed up for a ridge up on top and found something else on the trip. So at Disc Lake, obviously somebody had been there before us and had built a raft to float across the lake, I guess, or to fish in the lake or something. But it'd probably been there a long time, and they had some makeshift paddles and a couple of inner tubes and some plywood. At the time, logging roads went in quite far, and it was probably taken in at that time. And I believe this is I don't know if it's a long-toed salamander, but this was hiding underneath the one of the inner tubes that had been chewed by a bear or so and was deflated, but we scared up this guy. And then camping here was a much nicer. This was on our second night. This was right at Disc Lake. And then once we started going up the ridge, it was spectacular. So we're looking over to Obelisk Lake, Hanging Lake right in this area here with Mount Obelisk and the shark fin. Just this I believe was taken from the helicopter, which was almost the same angle as the last one. But this ridge, once you get on this ridge, you get right into the Five Fingers area. A little close up of Obelisk Lake and Obelisk Peak. And Obelisk Lake. So this is Spindle Lake, looking down towards Pitt Lake, and again Judge Howe in the background there, and a close up of Spindle Lake. There's many stories on the web about Spindle Lake, so if you want to check those out, it's kind of interesting. And again, Obelisk Lake a little bit further along with Obelisk Peak. And the Five Fingers area just off to the right. A little pond on the ridge. And sunrise looking at Judge Howe. And I remember coming by this little lake just below Disc Lake. We were on our way back. And Frank was talking about, Ian, I could see you building a cabin on this lake. So I've never been back to the lake, but hopefully it'll be there someday. So what we did find up there, we found an old Mitchell bomber that crashed back in the 50s, killing everybody on board. And at the time, I think it was the highest recovery by helicopter. But there was even markings on it saying that it had been found, and there were tent pegs, like old wood tent pegs and stuff, where you could tell that there had been a camp there, and so they'd taken out whatever they needed to take out, but left the rest of the plane behind. I'd heard about that there was a plane wreck up there, and it's another one that you can search on the web and find all kinds of information about it. And so on this particular trip, the fog came in and we got sort of trapped for a day where we really couldn't move up in the Alpine because we couldn't see where we're going. When we got a little bit of light because we were behind by a day, we had the idea that we might be able to drop down to Widgeon Lake and walk around the lake and head out the trail. And I'm certainly glad we didn't find a good route down from up there down to Widgeon Lake, because we would have had great difficulty trying to go around Widgeon Lake. So we end up heading back the way we came, and instead of heading down to Pitt Lake, we hiked the trail that we had put in that went over the Widgeon and walked out the Widgeon. We came back a day late. And the Widgeon Valley. So the Widgeon Valley is quite long. It stretches right down to the Widgeon campsite and then out into the Pitt River. So from the Widgeon Pass, if you climb up on a rock, you can look down on Pitt Lake and see Vickers Creek or Vickers Valley on the other side of Pitt Lake. And this is the trail crew back in the 90s. We're at the high point of the Widgeon Valley. Don spent many trips going in there, finding the route from Widgeon down into Quebec, and he did a fabulous job in finding a route down. Picture on the left is from back in the 90s and a more recent photo. That rock is still in place. Not sure about this one John's standing on. The mountain in the background is Gabbro. Little washed out on the photo on the left. So it's in some parts the trail is in really good shape, heading for the pass. But in other sections it's quite overgrown in rocky areas. You get down to sort of valley bottom, and eventually you pick up an old logging road. the walls of the valley are just continuous waterfalls. If you're in there in the spring, it's amazing. The upper part of the creek is underground, so you're able to just walk in the creek. Many waterfalls and snow caves where the snow comes down the steep slopes and then collects in the spring and then forms snow caves. And sometimes there's water in the creek, and in that case, you can't walk down in the middle of the creek. And this was our campsite that we used back in the 90s. Someone's taken a hatchet to the old hiking sign. But we've now used it a few times in more recent times, going up there, checking the area out. And there's a side valley that heads up towards that bomber area that I was talking about, the plane wreck. So it's a possible route to get up into the Alpine and do Mount Pinecone. Just a gorgeous creek. We found a bear skeleton along the way. Found a couple in the area now. Again, just boulder beaches with the creek. Lovely water to drink. Some places it's quite quiet in pools, not too deep, not really deep enough for swimming, but just lovely, tranquil areas. And then when we were in there in the 90s, we would be coming up the old road and that we cleared, and we get to this one section where the echo would come off the rocks and sounded like the creek was right behind this rock. So we had named it Echo Rock, and Doug Benny made up a sign. That sign is missing. I can't find it, but we put up just a little simple sign there so we know it's Echo Rock. But with all the trees that have grown up in the area, this is the same spot. It doesn't echo like it used to. It all gets deadened by the trees. Now, it's interesting, this area is just full of boulders, big, huge boulders. And what it looked like was a whole bunch of boulders came off of this peak and came down to the valley bottom and even went up the other side. It's quite interesting. The rest of the area is far different than this little short section of all these boulders. And in the creek, there's some beautiful waterfalls because of the boulders. And again, the side hills, just lots of creeks coming down, creating waterfalls. This is Snow Cave Creek. Mark Haddock talks about taking a truck and a camper, or trailer, I should say, up over this creek. And he decided that he should take it out. And when he took it out 2 weeks later, there was a massive washout. And so he was lucky that he got the camper out of there. It's hard to imagine somebody was even driving the roads from what I've seen of them, but that would have been back in the 70s. So this whole area has changed. It was quite open when we were there in the 90s, and now it's closed in an awful lot. So this is just looking over at Snow Cave Falls, and then a closer view of it. It's a beautiful little waterfall, a bit of a side trip you have to take. This was a BMN trip we did in the late 90s. And this is when we were working on the trail near Snow Cave Creek. Another group working. The salmon berries grew in like crazy, but it's really interesting watching how nature changes things. This area here that was all salmon berries has turned into a lovely road again, in that the big trees have grown up and cut off the light for the salmon berries. And some sections are quite amazing. Other sections of some of the salmon berries still are there. But it's quite amazing what the road is like. But the bridge is changed. So back in the 90s is on the left. There was a bunch of planks and some roofing shingles to walk on, and all that top decking is pretty much gone. Now you've just got one log to walk on. This is what the bridge looks like. It was supported on a huge boulder with concrete. So this log you can still walk on if you dare. But if you waited late in the season, crossing across the creek is pretty easy. It dries up pretty good. And just looking from the opposite side, so you can see all the planks have disappeared off of this section here. So you've only got the log to walk on now. And this is Joe Foy taking back in probably the early 80s when the Widgeon Lake sign was still in place. And that camping sign is actually showing going down to by the bridge. There was a big flat area that's all overgrown now, but it would have been a good camping spot. So just a side trip up to Widgeon Lake. So this is the bridge that goes across the creek. This bridge was built by Bob Edwards and I think his son. And it's, as far as I know, it's still in place, or at least it was last year. Nice waterfall right there. And then this is just a helicopter photo of Widgeon Lake with the beautiful waterfall coming out of it and Mount Peneplain in the background. This is a close-up of the lake. Now this little piece of land here, that's actually an island. Not sure if it shows there. Okay, no. So this photo was taken when you first come up the trail. It's a very steep trail that you get up to, and you get your first view of Widgeon Lake. And that's the island that's in the lake. There was a guy that built a cabin on that lake. Not Roy Mason, somebody else. And lucky enough, when we were there on a BMN trip, overnight trip, there was a pontoon sort of boat that we were able to go out on that somebody had built and left there. And so we used 2x4s and sticks as paddles, and we were able to go over to the island and have a look at the old cabin. I've heard now the cabin is flattened. And then down below, the crossing at Hanging Creek was starting to deteriorate. Back in the 90s, we used to drive vehicles over this road. And then back in 2015, I went across that bridge with BC Parks on ATVs, and then it collapsed even more. But lucky enough, a couple of years ago, BC Parks went in and put a new bridge in, so that's fabulous. So this is the beautiful waterfall at that bridge. So the Hanging Creek Falls. That's when I was there with a couple of BC Parks. And going for a little slide down the falls. Wasn't actually sliding, but it kind of looks like it. And then we're getting closer to the Widgeon Falls area. So this is the point where the Widgeon Lake Trail takes off. And BC Parks has put time and effort into the Widgeon Falls Trail, but it still needs more work. And the Widgeon Falls area sees lots of visitors. It's incredible the way the water is carved the rocks. This was a trail crew that was up there one day. And another part of the falls. Just amazing how the water is carved the rocks. This is a road that leads to the falls. And of course, the campsite where people canoe into and then go up to the falls. So BC Parks has put quite a bit of work into this camping area. They've got a kiosk with a map, tenting areas, bear caches, and pit toilets. So they've invested quite a bit of money into this particular area. Some signage. We're still waiting for signage on Burke. We've got posts, but we don't have any signs on them yet. And just a few photos of the Pit Lake area. I did a presentation earlier that you can look up if you want to see more photos of the Pit Lake area. So just threw this one in here is arbutus trees. A lot of people don't realize that Pinecone Burke Park has arbutus trees. So Pit Lake is the furthest east that arbutus trees grow. It has a marine park at Dark Creek. And it's a First Nation sign that will be going up to complement the other one. And of course, there's petrographs along Pit Lake. And this is Defarter Creek. So I've been the last couple of years, I've been exploring Pit Lake and looking for possible trails and that to put in. So Mark Haddock has been in discussion with Catesy First Nation and BC Parks about this. Just a lovely little pond. Beautiful little waterfall on the upper part of Defrauder. And then we'll start heading up on the Widgeon Bowl and Widgeon Peak. So this is the area that takes you from the Widgeon campsite up onto Burke Mountain. So the Widgeon campsite is down around this area here, and this is the route that takes you up onto the ridge between the Coquitlam watershed and the Pitt River. So a very steep trail that goes off. I was talking about it earlier, saying that it's the best trail in the Lower Mainland nobody knows about. We spent a lot of time on it in the 90s, and then we've spent a lot of time working on it in the last 5 to 7 years. So I had some windfall to be cut out. There's an old road that goes up, leads to some great spots to go and get water. And if people remember Lyle Litzenberger, he camped here a few times, as well as I camped in this area with him and worked on the bowl, which I'll show some photos of in a minute. And some of the switchbacks have become overgrown and really ugly looking. So we've put in some shortcuts that avoid the logging road switchbacks, and it's really nice. It's made it a beautiful trail going up there. An incredible stump. And the road's in fantastic condition higher up, if you could get to it, or if you could get to it with a vehicle. But yeah, it makes it really nice for walking. And then you get to Dawn's View. This was named after one of the ladies on the trail crew back in the 90s. Served a dual purpose. Her name was Dawn, and from that viewpoint, you would see the Dawn because it looks to the east. So this is the crew that was cleaning out the viewpoint. And then the view. The view's not the best now, but there's some other viewpoints that are a little bit higher up. So there used to be another viewpoint called the Widgeon Bowl Lookout that was put in by the forestry crew. We did a BMN hike up there long time ago, and at that time there was actually a view there, so you could look over at the Golden Ears Mountains. And just going back, that sign that was up on the trees back in about 2010 is now on the ground. So at some point, hope to get that put back up in place. And then just little signs showing where our new viewpoint is. It's pretty nice looking down on Grant Narrows and the marshes out in the Pitt Polder area, as well as Mount Baker in the background. And then you get up into the bowl area. This was horrendous in the 90s when we went through there with the salmonberry, and the salmonberry grows back pretty much every year. But we've been working on it to try and clear it out. It's a little bit better than it used to be. So it's looking down on Grant Narrows. So if you're going to canoe over, you'd park at Grant Narrows, and you go up the Widgeon Slough up like this. And it's about an hour paddle to get to the Widgeon campsite. So this is Lyle on the left. I went up there a couple of different times. We went up there about every 2 years. Lyle probably went up a couple of times on his own, just trying to fight back the salmonberry. We weren't very successful at it, but it pretty much needs to be cleaned out every year. But we went in with a bigger crew on the right, and instead of just cutting the salmonberry, we're actually digging up the roots, which worked a lot better. And so it's still a bit of root going up there, and the bears also help by walking those roots and keeping a path below the salmonberries. So this is a photo from last year going through there with 3 members of search and rescue, and it was overgrown, but it was still walkable. There's little tree islands in between, which gives you a break from the salmonberry. And again, the higher you get up, you look back down at the Pitt River, as well as Golden Ears to the left and the Widgeon Slough area. And just on the other side of the bowl, there's an incredible tree that's been scratched by a bear. We recently found a nice water source that's just on the upper part of the bowl. So it gives you a place to get water higher up. An interesting tree. And John Gillespie working on the trail. See that the tool engraved with BMN on it. And then when you get up to the Widgeon Pass area, so this is where you get up to, you've come out of the Widgeon Bowl area, and if you went straight down the other side, you would head into Orr Creek in the Coquitlam watershed. And at this point, if you would turn to the right or to the north, you'd head to Widgeon Peak, and if you turn to the left or to the south, you would head towards Burke Mountain. And that's as far as we made it on this day last year with the search and rescue group, but they came back in later in the year and did the full crossover from Burke Mountain down into the Widgeon campsite. So this is heading towards Widgeon Peak. So got Widgeon Peak in the center, got the sub-summit over to the right, and we call this little guy Little Pinnacle. Haven't been up on top of this guy, but I'm hoping to one day. So on the ridge heading towards the block summit of Widgeon Peak. And lucky enough on this trip here, we actually found 3 goats between the sub-summit and the main summit. Up until this point, it was the closest to Vancouver I'd ever seen goats. And then from up on Widgeon Peak, you get this incredible view looking down on the Pitt River and mountains beyond with Baker and the whole sort of Widgeon Slough area. So again, if you went parked at Grant Narrows, took the canoe up here, this is known as the East Fork that heads off, but you take this route here and this takes you to the Widgeon campsite. Just another photo from the summit looking over at Robbie Reed on the right and Judge Howe on the left. And another peak, Gabbro, that I haven't been up on, but hopefully one day I'll make it up on that one. And then looking beyond to the Five Fingers area. And Mount Pinnipplain will be in there somewhere probably too, probably around in this area. And from the summit, you get great views looking at Coquitlam Mountain. So this is Orr Creek that flows into the Coquitlam River just below the Coquitlam Lake Dam. And then Burke Mountain. We all probably know where Burke Mountain is, just the north end of Coquitlam. And it's a maze of trails up there, so I'll go through a few of the trails there. So this is a photo from 1992 showing the trailhead at Harper Road by the gun club. It really hasn't changed much in over 30 years. So we'll start off with the Woodland Walk. So we have some signage. The top 2 signs were made by Doug Benny, and the bottom one was made by myself probably 10 or 12 years ago. And up until last year, this is what this section of the crossing of Pritchard Creek looked like. But in the atmospheric river around October 20th, this area here, which you can't really see it, but there was a culvert underneath there, and the creek diverted higher up, and rather than the water go underneath the bridge, it came straight down and tried to go through this culvert. Obviously plugged up the culvert and took out a huge channel or canyon right before the bridge. The bridge is perfectly fine, but BC Parks went in and BC Hydro, and they tried to sort of warn people of the area. It threw logs, rocks, and all kinds of things on the bridge and on the old road. And then BC Parks went in and put in some orange markers. And this is the canyon that it took out. So this is from the bottom of the canyon. So it's about between 8 and 12 feet deep and about 15 to 20 feet across is what was taken out. Don't know when BC Hydro is planning to fix it. They have machinery up there right now fixing another part of Harper Road, so we're hoping they come over and fix that, but we haven't heard if they're going to or not. This is the waterfall that you see from the Pritchard Creek Bridge. And then just a little ways down the trail, you get to a section where you can either go on the lower loop or the upper loop. The upper loop has a pretty interesting old stump. It was logged 110 years ago. Another one with a face. And some signage up there to guide your way. A bridge that was made between or with BC Parks and the Pinecone Burke Stewards. One of our annual hikes that we do to celebrate the anniversary of Pinecone Burke Park. Very lush forest. And then you can get to the old growth Douglas fir tree, probably about 400 to 600 years old, right at the Woodland Walk Falls. And that's taken from a little ways away with Don standing there just to give you an idea how big the tree is. And the big stump that we always stop at, sometimes we put a whole bunch of people on top of it and take their photo. And then this year we took up a sign with the 30th anniversary. So this was the group we had this year on June 8th. And then we stopped at the Woodland Walk Falls. And then we went to Sawblade Falls. So the photo on the left was taken back in 1992, long before it was named Sawblade Falls or even had a trail to it. And then on the right was one of the BMN anniversary trips. And then this year we got a photo with the sign as well. It was a great day to have a hike. And then close to there is the Sawblade Trail. It's a mountain bike trail. And so this blade has been up there for an awfully long time, but it's great. This was one of my City of Coquitlam hikes. And the Coquitlam Lakeview Trail. So down near the bottom, there's a part of Pritchard Creek that you have to cross, a lovely little stream. Then you get up to the intersection where the South Slope Trail goes off. These signs, this photo was taken when these signs were in much better condition. And this is a Dry Creek crossing. Photo on the left was taken back in probably the 2000 area, and the photo on the right was taken more recently. Oh, sorry, it's sideways. And the original viewpoint for the Coquitlam Lakeview Trail was getting overgrown. So back in 2015, 17-year-old Sean was not in school in September because the schools were on strike. And so I spent 2 days up with him putting in the trail that goes to the new Coquitlam Lake viewpoint. So it's quite nice looking down on Coquitlam Lake and the Eagle Ridge Mountains in the background. And then just a few photos from the Village Trail and Gunners Trail. So Gunners is it's not used too often. It's a little bit wet, but it's getting a little bit better. I just threw this one in here. The mountain bikers have some incredible names for some of their trails, especially up on Eagle Ridge, but this one they call Mental Floss. And then on the Village Trail, the old signs from the cabin owners spelled Monroe wrong, but that's okay. The signs have been probably up there for 40 years, showing the way to ski from the cabins to Monroe Lake. And then the signs on the left here are the more recent ones put up by the cabin owners. The D stands for the route to Dennett Lake. Many years ago, we did a hike on the Village Trail. At this time, we went through all these wet areas between Lyle Litzenberger and myself and others. We have avoided all these sort of fragile wet areas and have put the trail around these areas, which is a lot better. But when there's snow on there, this is the easiest route for the skiers to go through. And the South Slope Trail. So again, the South Slope Trail takes off from the same area where the Coquitlam Lakeview Trail takes off. You go by the old big bulldozer. And I threw this photo in just because I've been talking about it recently. Once you're above the bulldozer, you cross over on a road that crosses a clear cut. And back in the 90s, when we used to walk that road, it was wide open and you'd have these views into Vancouver. Well, that's not the case anymore. It's all socked in. The trees have all grown up, and it's quite nice and shady walking through there now. And just once you get to the end of the road, you cross a creek, which is Coho Creek, with what we call Sweat Team Falls. And just on the other side of that is the old growth forest that takes you up into the Lake District of Burke Mountain. So you get up into Lily Pad Lake, Hourglass Lake, Ted K. Lake. Ted K. Lake is named after the person that used to operate the dam that was on Monroe Lake. And just from the other side of Ted K. Lake, I think it's the most scenic lake up there. And we had some signs up on the trees that weren't very high up on the trees, so we went up in the snow one day and moved them up higher on the trees. Got Roy, Maury, and Linda. And this is another one of the lakes in what I call the Lake District up on the ridge. And just before you get to the south summit, there's a beautiful little pond. And a picture from the south summit with Coquitlam Mountain in the background. And these signs are no longer there. They fell apart, but just showing you where Coquitlam Mountain and Widgeon Peak, the directions and the elevations. And further along towards Pika Peak, on one day I was up there with Dawn, incredible fungus along the way. And then from Pika Peak, you get beautiful views looking over towards Golden Ears and Raven Peak and Pitt Lake. And Benny Lake, named after Doug Benny. So we put up a sign there many years ago. That sign is disappeared again. But we've put up some steel ones showing that it's in honor of Doug. And hopefully maybe we'll put another wood one up there one day. And this was at one of our BMN meetings. Doug was honored with a sign of Benny Lake. Doug never made it to Benny Lake that I know of. But you can see the sign on the right that says Twin Lakes, which is also up on Burke Mountain. But when Doug made the sign, he put the stencil for the end backwards. So we call it Russian Lakes, but in honor of that, when they announced that the Benny Lake was going to be named after him, Jack Norrie, who's standing to the right of him, I believe he's the one who made the sign with the ends backwards. And then from the north summit of Burke, you look down into the Widgeon Bowl area, Pitt Lake, and again, Robbie Reed and Judge Howe in the distance. And from there, you can also look back on Monroe Lake. So this is Monroe Lake, and that's the actual dam that they breached back in the 70s, I believe it was. And then looking into Pitt Meadows. and Monroe and Dennett Lakes, which you go up from Quarry Road. Sorry, I'm a little overtime here, but it's not too much longer. So from Quarry Road, you can head up to Monroe and Dennett Lakes. About 3/4 of the way up, you get a nice viewpoint looking down on the Pitt River. And then you reach the first lake of Monroe. It's after the dam was breached. It's gone back to its more natural state, and it's now 3 different smaller lakes. And I believe Janet just swam in this lake last weekend. So this is the bigger lake that's better for swimming. This is over by the dam. And with BC Parks, the Pinecone Burke stewards put in a new trail back in 2019 that avoids a massive muddy area between Monroe and Dennett Lakes and takes you up to the beautiful viewpoint that you look down on Monroe Lake. So if you're hiking to Monroe Lake, you come up to this little pond here first, and then you go into this lake, and then there's another lake just on the other side where the dam is. And of course, Golden Ears Mountains in the background. That's showing the middle lake better, and then the larger lake is hidden behind these trees. And then I was up there last year putting in a couple of posts with BC Parks. This is Diego. He's a new BC Parks guy. And then a picture of Dennett Lake with the beautiful boulder field on the far side and the cliffs. And it's another great lake for swimming. And there's sundew there as well. And there's sundew actually at Monroe Lake as well. So that's a plant that eats the bugs. And just a couple photos from the Coquitlam River area. A lot of people don't realize the Pinecone Burke Park goes right down to the Coquitlam River. So Crystal Falls is within the park, as well as above Crystal Falls. There's some beautiful trails that go through the trees. So just like to thank all the people who made this park a reality and the volunteers who work on the trails and make it possible and safe for people to enjoy the great outdoors. And also thanks to all the people who supplied photos for this. I've got a big list of people that supplied photos. So thanks everybody so much. Maybe we'll go back to a nicer photo. And if anybody has any questions, maybe I'll stop sharing here.
Wonderful work you've done over the years to allow people to get up to Burke Mountain and enjoy the beautiful scenery there.
Great. Thanks, Elaine. You started it all. Between you and Mark and John Kishore are all fighting for this to become a park. So,
well, we just followed Don's footsteps.
Don was the ground guy.
Full photos.
Great. Thank you. Any questions?
Ian, I have a question. Just
Sure.
kind of curious
Just one?
about your, for now. I'm just really curious about your process. It seems like you went through the park multiple times, and it seems like the first few times you were just exploring, and then you were going back and putting up signs and connecting trails. And just how does this process work? Were you taking GPS coordinates? Were you tracking the
No.
trail? I
Yeah.
just don't know how things worked
Yeah.
back in the 90s.
Well, no GPSs, or we didn't have any GPSs. And honestly, Don was the leader of it in that he would go out and it was trial and error. So he would get aerial photographs. You know, this was long before the internet. So he would get aerial photographs and old topographical maps that showed the roads on it. So that's how you'd start. And then just going out there. I know of the route that he found. The 2 routes that amazed me the most is the one that he found from going from the Widgeon campsite to the summit of Burke, that, you know, he went multiple times on his own scouting the area out, and he was so happy when he came back and he said, I've got a route, I found one, you know, and there's massive cliffs that you have to avoid and steep sections in that. So anyways, he found a route through it. And same with going from the Widgeon, it was a road most of the way up. And the first section wasn't too bad, but to connect it from the Widgeon into Debec, he went in the early spring when there was still snow on the ground, with other people, 4-day trips going in there and just trying to find a route down into Debec. And it was, looking at topo maps, but just trial and error. Now, a lot of these trails have overgrown. So now we're going in with GPSs, which is so much easier that now we can track the routes. For instance, when we went from Widgeon trying to find our way, trying to find the way into Debec, looking at all the data that people were showing of the way to go, when we started following that, I realized just from my memory that this wasn't the way that we had gone in the 90s. And so it took a couple of trips, even with us with GPSs, to figure out that instead of going through one pass, we went through another pass. And then once we found the right pass, it just made perfect sense. So in some ways, we've been having to try and refine these old routes because it's been so many years since they have overgrown. But the GPS is helping massively. But it is also amazing in some of the areas, especially in the Boise Valley, a lot of the orange markers that were put up in 92 and 93, they're still there. Some of them have been bent over, so they're hard to see. But we were going through and we'd set a mark for every little marker that we found on the tree, and then we would fill in those gaps. So it's still been trial and error, but we're figuring it out. So the problem is it's different hiking if you're in the Alpine. We're in the open. All you need is a clear day, and you can kind of see where to go. We're in the forest, the thick forest, so it's you don't have those sight lines to be able to look too far. But the good thing about it is you usually have a creek or a valley to kind of put you in the right direction. It's
Sounds
a
like
lot
an
of
incredible adventure.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. The odd time it's frustrating, but most of the time it's a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thanks for
Yep.
all the pictures. I love the
Yeah.
presentation. And
You're welcome.
seems like a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And a lot of this, I really thank Don Gillespie for, because he was the one who had a vision that it should be a park and committed to, we've got to get it as a park. And eventually we did, thanks to an awful lot of trail work that he did.
Yep. And and Mark and John Gillespie and Mark, they did an awful lot on the ground too. All right. Any questions before we end it? No, just thank you to
Some
everybody.
beautiful photographs.
Yeah. Great. Well, actually, I don't.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah. Anything from the chat
Thank
that I
you.
need to? Nope. Just no questions. Okay. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah. You're very welcome.
Ian,
Oh.
did you notice that there was a journalist on the call?
Yes.
Has she been in touch with you?
Well, she contacted me to watch the presentation.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And does she know about the recording from the May meeting?
That I don't know.
Do you want to send her the link?
I could. I don't know if she's writing. I don't know if she didn't say anything about writing something about it. I think it was for her interest, as far as I
Oh,
know.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. She didn't put across that she was just interested in seeing the presentation.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. If it goes any further, then I'll let her know about it.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you for doing the recording, Brian.
Welcome.
Okay.
Thank you for putting the presentation together.
Yeah. Jeff, we got more to talk about. Anyways, we'll talk later.
Yeah. I'm glad you can make it, Elaine.
Certainly worthwhile seeing for sure.
Yeah.
You could sell some of those photographs, Ian, you know, they're of professional
Oh, yeah.
quality.
Yeah. Well, they're not all my photographs, but most of them were. So yeah. You said
Fantastic.
the big
Yeah.
list of like Jeff's photos. But and you know what, Jeff? I just thought I always try and even if you hand your camera to somebody, obviously Graham must have taken a photo of you when you're at that waterfall area.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Selfies
okay.
didn't exist back then.
Well, Mark or Chris Lostrup, which I credit him for one photograph because he went in with Mike Peel and myself for a day when Mike and I were going from the Mamquam to the Upper Boise, and but he took a lot of photos of himself, but he set up a tripod and he had a remote and all that sort of stuff. So you'll see a lot of in those beautiful BC magazines of photos with him in it, but he actually took the photo as well.
Yeah. A wonderful presentation.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Okay.
Yep.
Good night, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Take care.
good, Ian.
Okay.
Okay,
Good night.
see ya.
Yeah.
Bye.
We didn't win the Stanley Cup.
Oh, spoiler.